All right, everybody, it looks like we are live. Welcome, welcome. I am really looking forward to our session today. If we haven't met yet, my name is Emma Luzzi, and I help major gift fundraisers develop the skills, the strategies, and the systems they need to meet your ambitious fundraising targets. And today we are doing a live session on something that is really important, something I'm hearing that a lot of you are having increasing challenges with. We are going to be talking about how to build a high performance major gift fundraising team. So if you're new to these live sessions with me, I want to welcome you. I also want to ask you, go ahead and let us know where you are joining from. Go ahead and drop that in the comments, because the thing I love about these live sessions is it gives us a chance to actually interact, to ask questions, to build some community, and also to see that you are not alone in the challenges that you're experiencing. So I will be asking you to weigh in throughout this session. I'll be welcoming all of your questions. And first and foremost, I want to hear from you. Let me know where you are joining from. Hello, Jen. I see joining us from Edmonton. Go ahead and drop that below. And also, I'll always like to welcome folks who are watching the replay. I know I had a question from Australia and New Zealand saying this is at a bit of a weird time for us. So I really welcome you. If you're coming in from a different time zone when this time didn't work for you and watching the replay, welcome. Go ahead and also drop your comments and questions below. I'll come back and revisit those. If you can use the hashtag replay, that helps me find your questions when you're catching up. Okay, I see Cindy joining from Massachusetts. Rob, hello, one of our regulars joining us. Sarah, Whitney. I see a LinkedIn user. I can't always see your name, so forgive me if I'm not using your name. Sometimes LinkedIn doesn't actually provide that, but I see someone watching us from Calgary. All right, welcome everybody. We've got folks joining from all over North America. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and dive right in. And I wanna set some expectations up front around what this session is and what it is not. And I'm gonna start with what it is not. This is not a session about major gift tactics. This is not a how-to session. This session really is around thinking really deeply about the kind of skills that you want to both be looking for in your major gift hires, but also the skills that you want to be cultivating and developing on your team. We're also going to be talking a lot about culture, because I'd be remiss if I pretended building a high performance team did not entirely come down to the culture that you're building at your organization. The skills and the culture work hand in hand. So these two things are really important. Finally, I'm going to touch on something that's also a thing I like to talk about a lot. It's a big challenge we face in our work, and that is how our major gift fundraisers are being measured. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that, but I do want to touch on the importance of our metrics, what we're measuring and what we may want to measure instead to help build a high performance team. All right, I'm just going to go in quickly. Oh, hello. Yes, I see it as Nicole. All right, so Michelle, welcome. With that, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in, and I'm going to start off with the 4 skills of high performing fundraisers. I want to start off with skill number 1, which is a skill that we had a really interesting conversation about last week on a LinkedIn post that I shared. And I was sharing the importance of developing the skill of confidence. Now, I've talked with hundreds of fundraisers, major gift fundraisers, and I hear this a lot. I really want to develop my confidence. I want more confidence. And the really good news here is confidence is a skill. Confidence is learned. Too often, I think we think of confidence as something that we're either born with or we're not, but confidence is a skill that you can develop. And I want to share a really interesting quote that I read that was an aha moment for me from performance psychology expert Nate Zimser. So Nate says confidence is learned. And what it is, it's the result of like a consistent practice. So a consistent constructive thinking practice that basically allows us to look at our successful experiences and retain and benefit from those successful experiences, but also look at those less successful experiences and release and restructure them. So again, I often also like to say it sounds simple, but simple is not necessarily easy. But the good news there, I think, is that confidence is learned. It's a skill we can develop both in ourselves, but also it's a skill that we can support our teams to develop, right? So as we go along through these skills, folks are often a little bit surprised. These skills aren't always the skills that they expected to hear about on a high performance team. Often folks are looking for the hard tactical skills. Those can easily be taught. And these softer skills, I think, are the skills that are really important that underpin all of your success in major gift fundraising, as well as enabling you to have that high performance team. So I'm interested to hear from you when I get to the end of this section. Is this what you're expecting? Because number 2 is a skill that folks often are surprised about. When I say, if I had to choose one skill, this might be my number 1 skill for major gift fundraisers, and that skill is curiosity. Now, some people are like, curiosity, is that even a skill? And I will say, absolutely, yes. It's another skill that can be learned and it can be cultivated. And I believe that curiosity matters in your major gift fundraisers and your major gift team for a couple of reasons. First and most practically, I think curiosity can really create very strong donor relationships, because curiosity is really inspiring us as relationship fundraisers to ask strategic questions, right? We're asking strategic questions and we're really digging deep into understanding the motivations and the deeply held values of our donors. And curiosity is what underpins that and helps fuel those meaningful conversations that really help deepen our relationships. I'll call curiosity an advanced skill, and it's something that we all have innately, but it's something that can also be built up and developed in us, right? And curiosity, interestingly, I would say is a key ingredient in the next skill. And I love how all of these skills kind of play with each other and feed into each other. Because when you're cultivating your curiosity, that really helps you with important skill number 3, which is strategic thinking. Now, strategic thinking, I'll just say this, it's very difficult to find a simple definition of what strategic thinking is. We often know we want it, we need it, we want more of it, but it's hard to identify and measure. So I like to think of it as having 3 elements, especially as it applies to major gift fundraising. So the first element is the ability to see the big picture. The ability to see the big picture is really important when it comes to strategic thinking. And when I say that, this includes thinking about how different parts of your organization work together, thinking about external trends, and just being able to come up to see the big picture and not get caught down exclusively in like the day-to-day details. So being able to see and recognize and identify the big picture, understanding how all of our organization's parts work together, everything from that to recognizing, identifying, understanding external trends and how those might impact your major gift fundraising. That's all part of strategic thinking. Number 2, an element I think is important when it comes to strategic thinking is the ability to take the long view and understand how it impacts our day-to-day actions. Now, this can be really tricky in organizations and cultures that are caught up in urgency and short-term thinking. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that later as well. But the ability to step out of that, to take the long view and understand how your day-to-day actions actually end up impacting the long view is huge, right? And being able to take both into account, both balancing the long view and the day-to-day actions when you're decision making and setting priorities is an important element when it comes to strategic thinking. And the third, I always like to think about a well-worn idiom that comes up when I'm thinking about strategic thinking. And this is the negative version, but you've all heard this saying, I'm guessing, you can't see the forest for the trees. right? So I always think of strategic thinking as the ability to see both the forest and the trees and to hold those together in your decision making. So that is my effort to define strategic thinking for you and help you see how it might be showing up and impacting your work and your team's work on a day-to-day basis, and how you might be developing it in yourself, but also working to develop in your team and thinking about how you might coach your team to actually be doing more strategic thinking, because again, it is a skill that can be learned and developed. And then finally, skill number 4 is persistence. And persistence, I think, a little more simple than trying to describe strategic thinking. It's just the ability to follow a course of action, even when you run into obstacles and difficulties along the way. So important when it comes to all elements of being a high performance team. But I think it's one of the most important building blocks of successful major gift fundraising, right? I'll give an example. One of the things I hear from a lot of fundraisers right now, a big barrier is not being able to land more meetings with their donors. So a few of these skills can come into play here, but let's talk about persistence. Most people maybe give up after 3, at most 4 attempts, for example, to get in touch with a donor to book a meeting. But to borrow a well-worn statistic from sales, because I do believe we are all in sales, unpopular opinion, but it's mine. And when you're looking at sales, it can take, the old statistic is 8 or more touch points before you actually are able to reach and or qualify a lead. In this case, I'll say a donor. And a more up-to-date statistic I've heard thrown around is that number has increased significantly, just because there's a lot of, there's an increased communication, increased emails. So I've heard numbers as high as 12. That's aside from the point, because I think my point here is that you do need to persist past the point that most people do to overcome some of those barriers, right? And this is really, really important. Usually when I'm talking, there can be a variety of challenges that I see when fundraisers are unable to book meetings, for example. But that is one. Sometimes it's just giving up too soon and not being more persistent. All right, so we have talked about 4 skills that I think are important. It's not exhaustive, but I like these 4 skills because they're a little unexpected for a lot of people. And they also play nicely together and feed into one another, right? So curiosity can actually support and feed into growing our strategic thinking. Curiosity can also be something that supports us when we are wanting to be more persistent and wanting to book more meetings. We might ask ourselves, what's going on here? How can I adjust my approach? Is there something I can do to be more effective? So you can see they all kind of feed into each other and, and support each other. So I really like these 4 because, and that's why I chose them, because I think A, they're important, and B, they do kind of create a cycle of feeding into one another to create a more effective and high performing major gift team. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these skills do you think is most important, both for you as a fundraiser or for your team? Let me know in the comments. We talked about persistence. We talked about confidence. We talked about curiosity. We talked about strategic thinking. Which of these do you think is most important for your team? Go ahead and drop that in the comments. And I'm going to go through and answer questions as I can, but I'm going to have a sip of water now because I have talked for a bit. Okay. All right, so go ahead and let me know, which of those 4 skills do you think is important, and if there are any of those that you would like to develop. And I'm just going to field a question quickly here now from Rob. Hi, Rob. So we have our abilities and skills and drive to help our teams build the skills you mentioned. What about we get stuck and can't influence them to develop the skills they need? Would you recommend hiring a coach to help? Yeah, absolutely. I think having an external support for your team in the form of a mentor, a coach, a consultant, I might be biased, but this can really help shift things oftentimes. So definitely something to think about for folks if we get stuck in terms of internal influencing. So we're hearing curiosity is really important. Also confidence. Confidence is the foundation of all of the others, because when you have confidence, then you can learn and develop other skills. I love that. I'm guessing that's Nicole. All right, Jen, confidence and planning. Planning is a great one as well. Curiosity and confidence, Sarah says. So I like this. We're seeing a lot of trends around the two C's that are important. Whitney talking about persistence. It's really important for our team. Also strategic thinking. Yeah, strategic thinking is a huge one. The thing I love about all of this is that these are all skills that can be learned and developed, and you can support your team in developing them. So I find that really exciting. And I think it really helps us feel hopeful, right? It helps us feel hopeful as well when we're thinking about both recruiting folks, but also developing folks who are already on our team. Curiosity and positive persistence. I like that. I like the addition of positive on front of persistent, because yeah, that is absolutely super important. Excellent. I love this. So go ahead and keep dropping your favorites in there. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I always commit to these being, excuse me. I always commit to these sessions being 30 minutes. So I have a lot more to cover. So I'm going to dive into the 3 pillars of a high performance team culture, because you can develop all of these skills you want if you're not simultaneously also working on developing your organizational culture so that you can both attract and retain the talent. It's not going to work, right? You're going to end up losing folks or not being able to attract folks. This is often overlooked when we're thinking about building our high performance teams. We're thinking about what are the skills we need? How are we going to be training the team? But culture, as we all have heard the saying, eat strategy for breakfast. So you can strategize all you want and skills build all you want. But if you don't have a supportive culture, a culture that supports a high performance team, you're going to find yourself stuck in a cycle that just doesn't move forward, right? All right, so let me start with number 1. Again, there are many here, but I think these are 3 I wanted to focus on. So the first pillar of a high performance team culture is what I'll call common understanding, right? And what I mean by common understanding first is, let's think of it as the roles that we play on our team and in our organization as a whole. It can be the expertise that we bring, the roles that we play, and how these fit together. Okay, that's like a common understanding. A second and important part of this common understanding that supports high performance teams is understanding how each team member works best, right? Everyone has different learning styles. Everyone has different communication styles. And I'll use the example of myself as an introvert as a simple example. A common understanding amongst a team might recognize that I, as an introvert, have a ton of amazing skills and strength to bring to the table, including a lot of the skills that we talked about in the first section. But B, my team might also recognize that I need a different kind of schedule to refuel than my extrovert colleagues. That's a great example of common understanding. I used to work in a healthcare environment. I had a lot of evening events, and the expectation always was we were at an evening event, we would show up at 9 a.m. in the morning the next morning, no matter how late we had gone. That's the common understanding that probably didn't work for all of the folks on our team, because as an introvert, I would be coming in at 9 o'clock in the morning after being at an event all evening without having had the opportunity to refuel and recharge. So a little adjustment I would make there is that would bring us more in alignment with common understanding is also to say, okay, what does this team member need? Simple example, as an introvert, and how can we support the way that Emma rests and refuels and recharges that looks a little different, say, than the extrovert who heads the team. There's a simple example of what common understanding may be when it comes to the needs and strengths and skills of your team. Also, a common understanding. One thing that's really important when it comes to developing this is shared goals. Shared and well understood goals are really important when it comes to a high performance team. Now, that one sounds really simple, but when I touch on metrics and how we're measured towards the end of our session, you'll see that this can sometimes work against us in terms of building a high performance team. So there's one thing, is a common understanding of the roles we play, the strengths we bring, how those all fit together, a common understanding of how I might work best, how, what I need, what my different learning styles and communication styles are. These all feed into a common understanding, which is a really important part of building a high performance culture. Pillar number 2 I'll talk about is psychological safety. Now next, and this might be possibly most important when it comes to building a high performance team, is creating a culture of psychological safety. Now, I'll define this because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this term. But basically, psychological safety is a shared belief by team members that it is okay. In fact, it is encouraged and supported for you to take risks, to express your ideas and your concerns, to speak up with questions, to make mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. That's the key part there. If everyone has a fear of negative consequences, you're not going to have a culture of psychological safety, right? Psychological safety is key when you're thinking about building a diverse and equitable and an inclusive team. Psychological safety is going to be a really important part of that. All right. And I want to actually also address what psychological safety is not, because I do think there are a lot of misunderstandings about it. Psychological safety is not being kind and nice and, and never uncomfortable. That's not psychological safety, because what psychological safety does is create a space for constructive conflict, right? It creates a space for folks to be able to bring up their ideas, their concerns, to disagree, right? To disagree with one another, but also to disagree with those in charge at your organization. So it is not, psychological safety is not always being nice and kind and comfortable. It is having the space that everyone knows that they can speak up, raise different ideas, disagree without worrying about negative consequences. So hope that makes sense to everybody. This is huge and really challenging to develop. I think it's really important when you're thinking about both attracting and retaining team members. I think also it's something we really need to think about working on, especially in the major gift fundraising context, because I think I see a lot of teams that don't necessarily have that psychological safety to feel that they can speak up and disagree and make mistakes without fearing negative consequences. All right. Yes, so I'm going to keep going, and then I'm going to field questions right at the end, because I want to make sure I get to pillar number 3, which is very important and also challenging, but is increasingly important in attracting and retaining a high performance team. And that is recognizing and supporting work-life balance. Now, I saw something really interesting. I'm going to go ahead and drop a pin to this post below. There's a recent survey that's shared by my colleague, Joe O'Connor, who's the CEO of the Work Time Reduction Consultancy. And I found this fascinating. Brand new survey that came out said that work-life balance is the top #1 priority for when they're thinking about current and future employment. So when they're thinking about staying or leaving and seeking something else, 83% of 26,000 respondents to this particular survey, which was done by Randstad and covers 35 different countries. The vast majority of these respondents said that work-life balance is their most important consideration. It's their most important consideration over pay, for the first time since 2004, when they first started this survey. So there's been a huge shift. There's been a huge shift in our culture of work that says folks are looking for work-life balance. They're thinking pay is important, but they're actually thinking, I'm looking for work-life balance before I'm looking for pay. Now, don't get me wrong, competitive pay, competitive pay is important, but having a good work-life balance and having policies and a structure that supports that is something that folks are going to be looking for and may actually give you the edge to win out over another organization when they're taking into account all the pay and all the different benefits. So work-life balance, the number one consideration for people when they're looking for a new job or staying at another job. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that fascinating comment below and pin that for you so you can check this out. Unsurprisingly, also this preference was apparently even stronger among Gen Z workers. So here we go. If we're also thinking about attracting young talent, I think this is important for talent of all ages. But as we're moving in and trying to attract more and more Gen Z folks, as some of us are retiring out of the sector, we're going to really need to be thinking about how our structure supports work-life balance, how our organization is structured, how our policies are structured, in order to remain competitive and attract and retain the highest performing teams. Whew, that feels like that was a powerful 3 pillars. So let me know, what are you thinking when I'm sharing these 3 pillars? Some of these might seem like they're pretty challenging for you to achieve in your organizational culture, but it gives us something really interesting to work towards when we're thinking about achieving common understanding amongst our team members on a number of fronts. We're thinking about creating psychological safety on our teams. We're also thinking about recognizing and supporting structurally work-life balance, the work-life balance that increasingly is attracting talent over even competitive pay. Okay, so what surprised you about that? I'd love to know that. Anything here surprised you about these 3 pillars that are really important to developing a high-performance team culture in your major gift fundraising? I'll add one of mine is, all of these pillars of high-performance culture are kind of run counter to a lot of the cultures we've developed on our high-performance teams, right? So I find that really interesting. That's a kind of juicy question for us to dig into. How are we operating, and how might we need to shift our cultures in order to truly support a high-performance team? I did read an article that work-life balance is the last thing a CEO wants to hear about. Interesting. It may be the last thing the CEO wants to hear about, but if it's the number one thing that talent's looking for, that CEO might need to exercise their curiosity skills and think about, if we aren't actually offering our organization work-life balance, what is actually going to happen to us as an organization in terms of being able to attract talent? So powerful words I'm coming out with here, but I think folks can not like the idea of work-life balance all they want. Leaders cannot like the idea of work-life balance all they want. But what's going to start showing up on your teams is the fact that you're not actually able to attract and retain the talent you need to hit your ambitious fundraising goals. I'm salty today. But all these things are important, and we don't want to overlook them. All right, I know we're wrapping up and running out of time, just because I did want to dig into some of those more complex and challenging elements that make for a culture that's going to attract and retain folks. I want to talk briefly about measuring what matters, right? I want to talk briefly about measuring what matters when you are building a high-performance team. Because I know we are goal-oriented folks, our organizations are goal-oriented, but too often our focus ends up being exclusively on, and the focus of our boards and our bosses end up being exclusively on the bottom line, and that's hitting our annual target for dollars raised, right? I get it. I understand this. I've been a frontline fundraiser for almost 25 years. I understand that hitting our targets is important, but my question for you here is, challenge for you is, how can our organizations possibly thrive and grow if we are single-mindedly, exclusively pursuing one goal, sometimes even burning through our donor relationships to achieve it, right? And this kind of short-term thinking can actually ruin our chances of future success. So what I want to share with you is what I'll call still the number one overlooked performance metric that you need to be measuring on your team, especially if you want to be building a healthy and sustainable pipeline. And especially if you're a larger organization that's struggling against silos that are happening between your departments, you need to be, and I'd say the most underutilized metric is measuring the number of donors moving from your annual giving program over to major gifts, and then the number of donors that are moving back from major gifts into your annual program again. You might not use the same language as me, so adapt this as it fits for your organization. But this is so important for a couple of reasons. And I think it's the biggest sticking point, pardon me. It can be the biggest sticking point for a lot of team members, because what's happening when we are exclusively measuring the bottom line and the target achieved, that's what ends up happening then is people turn into what I heard a colleague call a donor owner, right? And what that means is, if moving a donor to a more appropriate major gift relationship manager is going to impact my target, achieving my target, like heck, you're going to take that donor away from me. So what ends up happening is that we hang on to donors when they may be more appropriately supported somewhere else in our organization, because we can't lose that contribution that they're giving as it relates to our target, right? So does that make sense to everybody? If we are not measuring things beyond the bottom line target, what's going to be happening is folks are going to start hanging on to donors. They're going to start fighting amongst themselves about who has what donor. And we're not actually going to be serving the donor relationship or serving the major gift team largely. So that metric can be a little hard to explain in a pithy manner, but what you really want to be thinking about is how donors are moving between different departments in your organization, especially if you're larger. So that, for example, a donor who's largely been giving to direct mail and direct marketing, hugely important to our work and highly valued by me as a major gift fundraiser. But at some point, maybe a donor is moving over there, over to me as a frontline fundraiser to see if we can establish and deepen more of a one-to-one relationship. And if we aren't measuring that and people aren't being rewarded based on measuring that, what is going to happen is that movement is not going to happen, and you're going to end up with people, I'll be quite frank, fighting and squabbling over which donors are remaining in their portfolio, even when it's more appropriate for things to get moved around. All right, I went a little over time explaining that metric. There are many other metrics that you can measure beyond that bottom line target. So hopefully that's piqued your curiosity. And I'd love to hear from you if there's a metric you've been finding or a measurement that you've been finding around the success of your major gift team that's kind of unusual and has been really helpful in terms of building that high performance culture, of building that common understanding. Here's a great example we call the common understanding of how you need to be working together, how we need to be collaborating and partnering across portfolios and across departments. So if you've got another metric, I'd love to hear from you that's working really well in beyond the bottom line target measuring, that's really helping your team become more high performing. I'd love you to share your secret. Let us know your favorite metric or measurement that you're using to help build a high performance team, and go ahead and drop that below. So I am going to wrap up in a moment, but yes, I love this. David's just sharing, shifting organizational culture. It's a monumental task. Absolutely. I find that in all of my work with clients. We are working on tactics and strategies. We're also talking about how is your culture, identifying ways in which your culture is actually impacting, supporting, but also potentially undermining the success of your fundraising team and of all your team members, right? Huge, huge, huge monumental task, but something that's really important for us to talk about. And David, I agree, leadership must exhibit these behaviors of these three pillars themselves, right? So you need to be role modeling, and your leaders need to be role modeling these three pillars for themselves. In order for people to truly feel safe and confident Okay, I love this. Yes, our organization, I'm guessing this is Nicole, our organization grows when our donors grow in gift size, in engagement, and in confidence to promote our mission. I love this. I love this. So I want to do a quick recap because I know we run a little bit over time. And I want to go ahead and recap what we've talked about so far. All right, so we talked about 4 skills. There are many more skills, but 4 of my favorite skills that you want to be also developing in yourself and supporting your team in developing and looking for in the talent you're attracting: confidence, curiosity, strategic thinking, and persistence are the 4 skills we talked about. And we also talked about 3 pillars that you need to be developing in order to foster a thriving, results-given team environment. And that is common understanding, it's psychological safety, and it's also recognizing the importance of work-life balance. And finally, I talked a little bit about why the way we measure performance isn't working right now. And I suggested a metric you might want to experiment with that allows you to kind of expand beyond the sometimes counterproductive approach of exclusively focusing on hitting annual targets. We've covered a lot of ground here. So if you have enjoyed this live, I have so much more to dig into on this topic. I want to invite you to sign up for my newsletter, Major Gift Insider. I'll go ahead and share that link for you on the screen. You can find this and sign up for this at blueskyphilanthropy.com/subscribe. I do these live sessions at least monthly. I also love doing webinars and workshops. I know many familiar faces here today. So I always share those on my newsletter list. So if you want to find out about sessions like this, go ahead and sign up if you're not already signed up. And also, I'm going to go ahead and stick around and see if there are any other questions that folks have as we wrap up. And if you're new to these live events, I welcome you to join us again next month. Make sure you go ahead and sign up, and you can go ahead and follow me as well on LinkedIn to get alerts about this. All right, so any final questions from folks? I will field them here. And if you're catching up on the replay, looking forward to seeing you in the comments. Let me know if you have thoughts and feedback there. And finally, thank you for joining us and for being such an engaged group. I love these live sessions for exactly this. It enables us to kind of interact together. It enables you also to see what are some of the challenges other folks are experiencing that they're sharing in the comments. Because I think it's so important to remember that we're not alone in our work, not only in our organizations, but also in our broader community. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you again in one of these live sessions. And all the best to you. Happy fundraising, my friends, and hope this has been helpful to you in continuing to build your high performance culture on your major gift team. Bye for now.